Let's unravel Geeta's world. Hello and welcome. This is the 94th episode of Geeta's World, just 6 episodes to clinch that 100th mark victory. How are you, Geeta?
I'm well. How are you, Anna? How are you feeling? 94th episode.
It's just feels that we are just at least I am still a newbie, still learning.
There's so much to learn.
Yeah, it's just
And
never ending.
it's never
It's a
ending.
vast world.
It
There's
is.
so many
And
countries.
so many interesting stories to
Yeah,
tell. So it has been an interesting journey so far. Thank you for being with us
yeah.
and riding along this interesting path.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you have listened to us before or you're tuning in for the first time, let us know what you feel and what you have felt throughout the episodes. Although we keep getting in a lot of many feedback, Geeta. But there's a number which you can text on, which is 8588 966 And there's an email ID, which is pods@indiatoday.com. So please feel free to write to us. Also you can leave your comments on this YouTube video. So Geeta, this time we are discussing something really peaceful because we are actually amidst this two ongoing wars, Israel Palestine. Of course, we have covered that in our podcast. Then there's this Russia Ukraine war, which I feel sort of in the international media especially has fallen off the radar, like in the to some extent, and even Zelensky thinks so. And that is why I think there was this entire
Rightly so, though.
rightly so, yeah. I mean, to reignite the focus, on Ukraine's battle against Russia. Ukraine held a peace summit in Switzerland just last weekend. So we'll be discussing that in the due course of this conversation. Of course, I mean, the highlighting point was that
Well,
Zelensky,
it's not Ukraine that held a peace conference. It was Switzerland that hosted a peace
yeah,
conference for
for
Ukraine.
Ukraine, yeah, definitely, yeah. And Putin was not invited. And China also opted to stay out of this. And of course, if you have gone through the news media cycle, the highlighting part was that India, the joint communique, the outcome document that is released just after the summit. So India refused, abstain to sign that. And there are other countries as well, which we'll talk about in the due course. So this conference was based on a 10-point peace plan presented by Zelensky in 2022. So that was in continuation. Basically, like a symbolic effort by Kyiv to rally international support and show strength against Russia. So first, Geeta, like endorsing peace without Russia being a part of it, like it raises questions about it's the entire summit's viability, and we'll understand the outcome and everything. But then, what was the motive behind like Ukraine's motive behind it, that you'll invite all these global leaders. Biden, he gave it a pass. Without Moscow attending, like how can they contribute to ending the war, ensuring peace in the region without having the concerned parties participating and engaging in a dialogue when you know that both parties' idea of peace differs?
So I think to begin with, peace conference was important and is important, but it is of no value to a certain extent if both parties are not there. There, I completely agree with you, because this almost felt like an effort to show support for Ukraine,
Yeah.
which is good.
Hmm.
But does that support come with a way forward towards peace? Um, Look at the timing of it, look at how it was placed. 14th and 15th were the dates, 13th, 14th, 15th were the dates of the G7
Yeah.
summit. Immediately after, 15th and 16th was when the Swiss conference was held. The peace conference was held. And that was only to ensure that all these G7 leaders and the invited countries make it to Switzerland,
Yeah.
because they wouldn't have been able to travel back and forth. And so most of them did travel from Italy to Switzerland. But Indian Prime Minister did give it a miss. goes to show that in terms of the stand that India has when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, that they're not going to uh, a high level participation at the prime minister's level would have meant absolutely backing and supporting. And which is why Zelensky was in Italy before the peace conference, and he met with the leaders there, those who did not come as well, which is the Indian premier too. When the war had started, and India took a very strong position on Russia,
Right.
and they were also criticized. India was also criticized by the West and many other countries. Zelensky took a very hard position. He recalled his ambassadors from those countries that were not supporting Ukraine. Only later for the West and then for Ukraine to realize that India has a position, but India also has influence. And so you need to, be friends with India and be on the right side or in the right books of India. Which is why in Italy, although they knew that there's not going to be no leadership level participation at the summit,
Right. Yeah.
at the peace conference, Zelensky was there, and you saw the two hug and have that conversation. So we had a bit of a hug diplomacy
Yeah.
there as well. Clearly shows the kind of importance that both countries really give to India, and how important it is for them to know that, okay, India is a country that can maybe influence Russia. And so the kind of outreach, so to say, in the outreach sessions that Prime Minister Modi was attending at the G7 summit, there was a separate outreach happening between Ukraine and India. Having said that, going back to the summit itself. So you had participation from the big countries, but Biden did not go.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris went.
Yeah.
That's why at the G7, if you see, they had pledged around $50 billion already. So the commitment is there, and that's why we did not see Biden. Now, Russia and China, two important countries, not being in the room is a very, very important and a serious thing. China was not there in support of Russia. India's high-level participation was not there because they could not have gone ahead and, a leadership being there and not signing the document would have looked bad.
Okay.
But the fact that China was not in the room. Now, what happened was before the conference began, there was an entire conversation on what should be the basis for peace. And in that conversation, they almost made the Ukrainian proposal as the basis, to which then there was a lot of criticism that if this is the basis, then it's already partisan. It's not a non-partisan conference, because you've already taken Ukraine's side and you said this that Ukraine wants, for Russia to follow through, for peace to prevail. But Russia already has an advantage over Ukraine right now, whether if it's on land, whether if it's weapons, whether if it is a military power. In every aspect, they're better than Ukraine. So why should Russia actually accept these terms and conditions? And then you don't have them in the room. Clearly shows that it was a Western bloc trying to show that we are all with Russia. Hasn't really helped much, because in return, the Russian president, even at the G7 when the $50 billion were, and the $50 billion, might I add, is not aid that the West is giving to Ukraine. It is the interest from the frozen assets of Russia.
That's
So
breaking
Putin has
news.
called it theft. and he's warned the West, saying that, there'll be consequences to pay.
Right.
So you're starting with Russia warning you when you're holding a peace conference in Switzerland.
But if you see, the EU in itself is also not unified in terms of how they're seeing the Russia-Ukraine war.
You mean EU or you mean the European countries?
I mean the European countries.
Yeah.
Right? Because and considering there are elections taking place in the European Union, and we'll soon have the results, and the preliminary results show that there is a surge of the far right, political leaders And there might be like a in the sense that if there is a surge, and there's also this thing that people are already very disenchanted with the war going on, that it has contributed to inflation, it has contributed to a very slow
Poor
economic.
living standard.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So there, I mean, do you also think that there could be like a different in approach towards how the EU sees the Russia-Ukraine war
Oh yes.
with
There is
the.
going to be a huge difference should there be a change in government in all the
Mm,
countries that are going to elections
yeah.
owing to the EU elections. So EU elections was like a barometer. It was like a test
Mm,
for whether if the leadership in the respective countries, whether it's France, you know,
yeah. We saw the snap
yeah, yeah,
elections.
yeah, or other countries, whether they'll hold or not, and which is why you see France is going for an early election. Macron could
Lose.
lose
Yeah.
should he wait longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
His popularity is already dipping.
Dipping. Yeah.
So if it dips further,
Mm,
he will lose. So he's thinking now is the time when I'm. He has a slighter edge over Marie Le Pen.
mm,
Le Pen. So if he loses that edge, he's going to lose. So he thinks that
mm,
it's so no time to campaign, but that this is the moment. But then again, it is the far right is anti-immigration. They have a huge problem with the wars, um,
yeah.
inflation, rise in prices.
Mm,
There is a lot that these countries are dealing with. Similarly, not to do with the elections, but again, drop in popularity,
mm,
indications on at the polls is the reason why UK also
yeah.
is going in
Yeah.
for early elections. So you have all these countries that are going in for early elections, and war is becoming extremely unpopular in most of these countries.
Mm.
And if this continues, then Ukraine is going to have a lot of problems. Especially, and
Oh,
somebody was
and there's.
asking me
Yeah.
that what happens if things change in Europe? How will that impact
Right.
Ukraine's prospects?
Mm,
To which I said, whatever happens in Ukraine,
mm.
please keep your eyes on what happens in the US.
US. That's what. Yeah. There's a.
Because if things
Yeah.
change over there,
Yeah.
now that will be a game changer
Because we know
in
how
this war.
how Trump, I mean, views
It'll
the
also be
war.
a game changer in the Israel Hamas war,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
certainly a game changer here too.
Which means, I mean, the Israel Hamas war, I think, is one of the biggest contributors, which is costing Biden his
Yeah,
presidency this
one of
time.
the major contributors
Right.
to Democrats facing a difficult time because
Yeah.
it's the Democrat base
Yeah.
which actually would not be for war.
Of course. I mean, that's
And
how.
it's the Republican base that would say it's more important to be pro-Israel than to be anti-war.
Yeah. Yeah. Just coming back to the point that you said, Geeta, regarding the G7 summit, I mean, you said it is perfectly timed, but it's also, I mean, if you like what I read is that this particular summit has been delayed 5 times. It was finally scheduled like this weekend, last weekend, as in June 15th and 16th, but it has been delayed 5 times already, which means that there is kind of like thought that was put into scheduling this event at a G7. I mean, along the same time when the G7 was being hosted.
So Anna, scheduling was a huge problem,
Hmm.
and we know this because the envoys from Switzerland went and traveled the world over.
Right. He
The
came to
foreign
India.
secretary was in India, and I interviewed him, and we asked the same questions about why is it that Russia has not been invited, and he said, well, these are early stages, we'll see, but right now the focus is to ensure what and how to bring about peace for Ukraine, not on the same page, so on and so forth. He'd come, this is before election, so he'd come with the invitation for Prime Minister. And we were
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the conference is going to be held
Yeah.
after.
After.
It's like Italian Prime Minister inviting Prime Minister Modi for G7. And we said, but the How
Wait
do
for
you
the.
know whether if,
Hmm.
but they were like, yes, for the Indian Prime Minister, but
Hmm.
particularly Prime Minister Modi. So it's
Hmm.
been addressed to Prime Minister Modi, and that's why he was invited.
Hmm.
But coming back to what you were saying, they had envoys go to every important country and every other country as well, inviting the leadership.
Still, only 90 countries of
See, it's
the
not
one
a
set.
78
No, 90
signatories,
countries.
78 signatories,
Yeah.
90
Yeah,
countries
of the one,
represented
yeah,
themselves.
160 countries were invited, but then there were, that's like, I mean, just wanted to come at this, that Zelensky, he.
There are the reports that China did
Hmm.
dissuade
Yeah.
some of the countries from
Oh,
actually going and attending. But
okay.
then, and so must have Russia. So, leadership level,
Hmm.
forget about leadership level, they actually didn't attend.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That, when this summit was about to happen, Zelensky, he said, predicted the world. I mean, he said that the world would see history being made. But I want to understand what history was made, because as we see, at least here in India, the international media also, how they are saying it, that the biggest highlighting point has been that the Russia leaning countries, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, India, then there's Indonesia, Mexico, the UAE. They disassociated themselves from the final document. So that's like the breaking news, right? That's the headline. So what history has been made, and how? I mean, let's just try to understand how viable was the summit that would or could ensure the way to peace. Because anyway, the outcome document covered only three of the most uncontroversial points of the formula: food security, nuclear security, and the return of prisoners and the children. And the controversial issues like reparations, like war tribunals, or the withdrawal of Russian
No, no,
troops
no.
from Ukraine.
Didn't the conference also have the joint communique also have an entire thing on the territory?
It
That
does, yeah.
that's all. That's the deal breaker.
Okay, yeah.
For Russia,
Hmm.
Anna, that's the deal breaker.
Hmm.
Because right now, after reaching the Dnieper River
Hmm.
and taking over the nuclear, you can say nuclear security, and taking over the nuclear power plant,
Yeah.
which is a huge source of electricity,
Yeah.
taking the whole of Zaporizhia,
Hmm.
many parts or some parts of Kharkiv, Kherson, Mykolaiv, do you think they will just walk back? Because now,
Hmm.
and we've discussed this before,
Yeah.
if Putin walks back politically, just imagine after losing so many lives,
Hmm.
Russian lives,
Hmm.
he walks back, what will the Russians say? That why did we lose so many people? For what? What
Yeah.
was the purpose?
Especially the fact that he has been elected for the third
Yeah.
time. So,
So
I mean,
till,
he's the.
in fact, till we have Zelensky and till he continues to be made a war hero, I don't think Putin is going to give in.
Okay.
So everything aside, you might think it's diluted, but that territorial
Yeah.
and going back is a deal breaker for Russia right now, because Russia says they're not going to,
Hmm. So, this is like a.
which is if you look at international rules norms, it's a violation.
Hmm.
Russia will have to come and say exactly how. But that happened in Donetsk and Luhansk also, right?
Yeah.
And now they
Precisely.
are, and then the five regions that they took, they held a referendum,
Hmm.
and Melitopol,
Hmm. Yeah.
Mariupol,
Yeah.
they held referendums, and now apparently, initially it was just Donetsk and Luhansk. Now there are other regions also that are now officially part of Russia. So how do you take that back?
Right. Yeah.
And even if Donetsk and Luhansk for the longest was just troubled area, independent regions supported by Russia,
Hmm.
they were never going to go back to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then Russia took over the areas now. But even then, everybody knew what was happening. Crimea was taken over. What happened? So this whole putting it in on a piece of paper and saying, well, this is what it
Hmm.
is, does not work for Russia. You have to come to the talking table. If you actually want peace, both sides have to come to the talking table. And I don't think President Zelensky and his politics and where he comes from actually allows him to come to a negotiating table with Putin.
Hmm. Right. Just the day before the summit began, Putin had also issued a peace proposal that included demands for Ukraine to abandon four provinces claimed by Russia.
That's what,
Yeah,
because they're now Russian territory.
that's what. Yeah, and it also is demanding that Ukraine should, drop its ambition to for NATO membership, and so I mean there was this whole ruckus about it that Zelensky noted that Putin's ultimatum sort of played in Kyiv's favor because he said that some of the countries changed their mind after his ultimatum. So he said that the enemy's mistakes are also like a success for us because owing to that peace proposal by Russia, it kind of enabled the other countries to come in favor for Ukraine. But
So
anyways, I mean,
which might not be untrue. When you see the
so
attitude
which
and you see,
countries? I mean,
I really don't know which countries he's talking about, because there was absolute clarity in us knowing which are the countries that are actually going to go ahead and support and the ones that are going to
mm,
abstain, India being one of them. One, we sent secretary level participation. Well, there was secretary level participation from India,
yeah,
India's Secretary West, and former ambassador to Russia,
Russia.
Ambassador Pavan Kapoor,
Yeah.
was representing India.
Mm,
And in a statement, he did say that while we have participated and we
mm,
want lasting peace in the region and so on and so forth, but we are not going to be signatories to the document,
mm,
because the document itself is a non-starter, if you ask me. Not that they should not put their foot down on territory. They should, Anna. They
mm,
should be doing that. But my only thing is that if you make it so hard and fast with somebody like Putin,
yeah.
then it's not going to
Mm,
serve any purpose. Look at Putin with
mm,
his counter that he's come. And why is he coming with this counter? Because the more the West pushes,
yeah.
the more he pushes back.
Yeah.
And so he's saying this is all a Western propaganda. And if you look at a peace conference without having the other party there,
Yeah.
it does feel like a propaganda. And then
Mm,
in all this, I'm thinking, who's suffering the most?
it's the
Ukraine,
Ukraine.
people of Ukraine.
Mm,
Because if you're not going to, the idea should be that you need to find
mm,
lasting solution with the aggressor rather than with the country, or with those countries who say मैं तुम्हारे साथ हूँ, I'm right there with you,
mm,
you go ahead, and then provide nothing.
mm,
They've been lacking in, they're short in supply of weapons,
yeah.
armament, even intelligence for that matter, everything. So,
Mm,
what is the coordination here? And then you again are insisting on NATO. The whole premise of this war has been NATO.
NATO.
And then when everybody thought that, they'll be joining NATO because now that they've been attacked,
Mm,
they said, well, NATO's criteria are stability,
yeah.
democracy, no corruption. And Ukraine does not fall in any of those categories, not even democratic.
Yeah. Not even
So,
Democrat. Yeah. Yeah.
so then what do you do?
Mm,
So there's a problem here in how the conference was approached, although a very important one. But till the two stakeholders are not, it's like saying that you can have a Camp David and Israel Palestine solution without either an Ehud Barak from Israel or a Yasser Arafat, or an Oslo Accord for that matter,
yeah. Yeah.
without the leadership of both the sides, Rabin and Arafat again.
Mm,
You cannot have a peace process without having
mm,
the two sides sit across the table. What is difficult over here is that one is an aggressor, the other is the aggrieved, but you've had this situation since the beginning of time.
yeah.
You still need to sit across the table.
Yeah, I mean,
And the Western idea of Russia's isolation is so complete
hmm,
that they wouldn't want to think otherwise.
hmm,
And that is a problem because Ukrainians are not sitting waiting for the West to help anymore, because they have seen it and they've seen how it works and how
yeah,
it's been working.
yeah,
When we were there to cover the war,
yeah,
Anna, and this whole, and we've discussed this before also,
hmm,
you should go back to watch, or
yeah.
back then hear those
No, no,
episodes.
yeah, you'll have to listen to all those episodes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because they were not in video format.
yeah,
But the NATO, the war was happening, and there were people who were being rescued and walking into Kiev. And those who were coming in had said, and we were asking them what happened, then quite a few of them were saying, "Where is NATO?
hmm,
Where is NATO?" Because, everybody thought that, well, here was the Ukrainian president who kept saying, "We are now going to join NATO, we are going to be part of the NATO." And then Russia was so riled by it, they went ahead. And this is what is the premise of Russia now saying that you cannot join
hmm,
NATO,
NATO, yeah,
because they're saying we don't want military, NATO, Western military in our backyard, as the US does not want
hmm,
Russians and Chinese in their backyard in
yeah,
Cuba,
yeah,
so which had led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. But anyway, um, they most of them actually thought that should there be an invasion, that NATO will come to their rescue. And there were
oh,
actually little boards and all
oh,
these screens where they had written in bold, "Where is
where
NATO?"
is NATO?
So did you misguide the people in Ukraine? What happened?
Hmm,
And if you did misguide the people, it's time to tell the truth. There is going to be no NATO. He admitted to that, 1.5, 2 years down the road.
hmm,
But what's the use?
yeah,
And then you again have the whole NATO,
yeah,
mm, conversation happening,
again,
to the extent that Putin says, well,
hmm,
forget about the territory now and forget about NATO.
hmm,
Only then can there be peace. Are we looking at a future where, from Donetsk and Luhansk being the border between Russia and Ukraine, now it's become Dnieper River?
hmm.
And that's a lot of territory.
That's a very
So
valid
there
thing.
has to be a
Yeah,
give and take. Russia
hmm,
cannot sit on all those areas
hmm,
and think that, it's okay.
hmm,
Although it'll be very difficult, but there has to be a middle path.
yeah,
In all probability, which I don't see happening, Putin walk back at all.
hmm,
But should there be a moment of any negotiation where you're talking about lasting peace and a promise of not joining NATO,
hmm.
I'm imagining Donetsk and Luhansk, the
Okay,
areas that were taken in 20, that were freed in
yeah,
2014 and
2014,
now
yeah,
with referendum
hmm,
are part of Russia.
hmm, okay,
So I
hmm,
think that will become the natural boundary. But I don't see them moving south of Dnieper anytime soon. Because
that's,
that river
yeah,
becomes a natural
yeah,
boundary. It's
yeah,
very difficult
yeah,
to fight across a river,
yeah,
especially when quite a few of the bridges have been blown up.
hmm, yeah, exactly. They are in pieces right now.
Yeah, also then
And,
there was this entire thing about who blew up the bridges.
hmm,
Quite a few of them were blown up by the Ukrainians because they did not want Russia to enter.
yeah,
And that was infrastructure gone, because
yeah,
now when they have taken over till Zaporizhia, they have no way of going
going, okay,
and taking it back. So it's a difficult one.
yeah, yeah,
And the peace conference, while
hmm,
has a lot in terms of
hmm,
what they want, how they want, and
hmm,
there's a lot of intent there,
hmm,
Anna. But
hmm,
I'd still say that if you don't have stakeholders in the room,
hmm.
the peace conference is only a conversation about how to keep isolating the other and moving forward to ensure that at least there is no escalation.
Yeah, I think it's just like
Beyond
rallying,
that,
yeah, it's just rallying up support internationally, but in terms of like practical decisions and actual decisions,
yeah,
it's nothing. So interestingly, Geeta, like you're speaking, this isn't the first time a peace initiative has been proposed. Like if you multiple countries and blocs persistently, they show a willingness to become mediators between the two parties, in this case Russia Ukraine. But it is also, I mean, quite interesting to see that most countries that have abstained this time had previously proposed peace plans. Like if you see China, sorry, not, I mean, China didn't come to the table, but China had devised a 12-point plan for the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis last year. But Kiev rejected it because, of course, we know. Saudi Arabia is one of those countries that abstained. Saudi Arabia had proposed a peace initiative involving all BRICS members, uh, but Russia was not there. But this too, of course, it failed to garner consensus. Then Africa. I mean, African nations had also put forward a 10-point proposal last year. And if you see Indonesia, Indonesia had also suggested creating demilitarized zones monitored by international observers and UN peacekeepers. Brazilian, it stayed out. I mean, it chose to stay as an observer and did not like vote. But it had, I mean, Lula had proposed leading a peace club of countries not directly involved in the conflict to broker, discussions. But now, if you see, I mean, they were at one point mediators, but now in the
So you interesting that you've asked this question. This is a very important one. Look at the countries, look at the blocks,
yeah,
and the issues here. Saudi Arabia, Africa particularly,
yeah,
was majorly affected. West Asia and Africa were affected for the wheat supply.
yeah,
All the wheat comes from Ukraine.
yeah,
So they need the wheat. So then the entire grain deal happened, right? The Black Sea grain deal.
yes, yes,
And they realized the importance of fostering peace or ensuring peace between Russia and Ukraine. So you saw all these proposals. A lot of countries that were affected. A lot of countries that thought that this is a required peace, needed peace, a peace of necessity, not just of desire.
yeah,
This is a piece that is required for them to be able to sustain their food security and food needs, the basic food needs. Wheat, very important. But more importantly, why did they abstain?
yeah,
Please see their ties with China and see their ties with Russia. So it's a very important one where China has managed to ensure that friends abstain.
because that's a
Russia has managed to ensure that friends
like,
abstain.
yeah,
So important countries have stayed out of the text, out of the agreement or the joint communique, only because also most of it feels not feasible. It is not feasible because the premise of it has already been rejected by Russia,
yeah,
even while they were announcing and signing it, that anything that talks about territory, forget about it. And when the 50 billion aid was announced, the Russians said that now we've reached a point of no return.
yeah.
So when you have already said, when Putin has already said this is a point of no return, how? How are you then, thinking you'll be able to do this?
Right, yeah,
So there is a huge issue over here in terms of the approach, how this peace conference was approached. I think the intent was right. The means of trying to have this conference was right. The approach and the methods certainly were areas that were left quite wanting, because you would have wanted to have all stakeholders in the room.
yeah,
You would have wanted to hear all of them and create a premise for conversation that was acceptable to all. Otherwise, we've already heard the Russians warn.
yeah,
We've already seen China not in the room.
yeah.
Then how are you going to
Anyway, it's
go forward
out
with
of
it?
the question. Yeah. Interesting that you say that. Just lastly, when we, I mean, as we close this, Let's discuss India as well because, and let's talk about the other war that is happening between, I mean, Israel and Palestine. G7 leaders, they have been like unflinching in their support for Israel, despite the many human rights abuses that Tel Aviv has been carrying out in Gaza. Some, like, so many people are saying that, these countries and their leaders will end up on the wrong side of the history because they are, in effect, supporting a state that has been accused of war crimes, and a leader was just prolonging this war to stay in power. On the Israel Palestine conflict, India does talk about a two-state solution, despite Prime Minister Modi's friendship with Netanyahu. But suppose, like, we contrast this with India's stance on the Russia-Ukraine war, where you are refusing to call out Russia or for its excesses and not signing declarations. So, how do you think this reflects on Indian foreign policy, and this thing of Russia not being there at the summit? Would Israel have attended a peace summit to address the Gaza conflict? So, why is the country that's in the firing line and being attacked being made to suffer with countries opting out of signing declarations because the aggressor, which in the case is Russia, has conveniently decided not to attend? So, my question being about how this is reflecting on India's foreign policy, that despite there's a good relation with Netanyahu, you choose to, be very vocal about the two-state solution. But here, on the other hand, while signing declarations and, you take a step back.
But India has abstained on the Israel-Hamas front at the United Nations as well.
Yeah, let's not forget that.
And then we did go ahead and then support a resolution that was on humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
Finally, we did. And in this case also, should there be a resolution for Ukrainians and humanitarian crisis? I suppose India will. So the position has not deterred. In fact, if anything, if you see India's position of neutrality, that is actually quite stable and sustained one from Russia Ukraine to Israel Hamas war. In fact, there are other countries where you can look at the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
For example, America, for example, the whole of Western Europe. When Russia-Ukraine happened, they called it war crimes. They said genocide. They said that civilians are being killed.
Yeah.
And then when Israel-Hamas war happened, no such thing. America
Nothing, in
blocked
fact.
every UN resolution saying that, well, they have not condemned the October 7th attack. Now, there are countries there who would not have condemned. And that's why the text was maybe diluted.
Yeah.
Then bring out another text and the P5 will push it through. But you cannot allow humanitarian crisis to persist just because you think that the condemnation is not good enough. I mean, that's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
That those lives were more important or more important than the Palestinian lives. India has not been hypocritical at all in this case. They attended, not at the highest level, but they did.
Yeah.
And by attending, they showed that they do believe in peace. They do believe in peace processes.
In fact,
By
Prime
not
Minister Modi,
signing, they have shown that if a text is not agreed by the two stakeholders, then who are we?
Yeah.
And on Israel-Hamas front, we have continued to maintain two-state solution. We have now signed on the resolution on humanitarian crisis and a stop to the actions in Gaza by Israel. So I think right now we don't look bad at all compared to how other countries have behaved.
Yeah, very true.
Including one-sided conferences. They don't help. Although completely for peace, completely, but it should happen if there's a Western intent at play, and Ukraine is getting played, then there's a problem, boss. Because you are doing this without bringing the other stakeholder aggressor, whatever you want to call it, it cannot happen without the other, right?
Yeah.
Even if you want to show it in bad light, just to isolate the other
Yeah.
by not
Yeah.
is not acceptable.
Yeah. So, I mean,
So there has to be a middle
with
ground.
this peace summit, I mean, what positive can you actually extract when you know that there's, I mean, both the parties have not been involved. I mean,
I
Russia
think
was
that
not
a
there.
step back to not the conference, but what happened just before the conference.
Hmm.
They promised aid to Ukraine. Let's see whether if that's going to come in time, because right now again there they seem to be faltering.
Yeah.
And Russia, China standing together today is not a good news. Is not good news for the West.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not here
Hmm.
in case of Ukraine, not in the case of Palestine, not in the case of how things are panning out for them in the entire Southeast Asian region. So there is a lot of problem there.
Hmm. Right. Okay, I think we'll keep an eye on the upcoming developments in the war specifically, Geeta, because Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced that Canada is planning to host a gathering of foreign ministers in the coming months to advance discussions on the human cost of war in Ukraine. And also, Swiss foreign minister has also mentioned that a follow-up summit to the recent peace talks that have just concluded is conceivable before the US presidential election in November. So that, I mean, we'll see how that will yield because anyway, people are just saying that, these summits and these dialogues are like just gossip because Russia is closely eyeing the presidential elections in the US, which could probably be an upturn to what we are seeing right now. So thank you so much, Geeta. It was lovely speaking to you. And to all the listeners and viewers who stayed till the very end, let us know how you felt about the episode. And we'll be back next week with another topic. So stay tuned.
We're 6 episodes away
Yes. Thank
from
you.
hitting a century.
Yes.
So keeping our fingers crossed, and thank you for listening to us, for watching, and for your feedback.
Yeah. Thank you.